This is on now, so just
Okay.
so you're hot. You're hot.
Sure.
So
All
don't
right.
say anything. You'll
Won't get myself
say
canceled, yeah.
So we're going to start with say and spell your first and last name.
Sure. My name is Zach Stanton. I'm deputy editor of Playbook at Politico.
Okay. So you came here to Michigan, to AMDCR, to talk about an incident that happened in Warren.
Yes, Warren, Michigan.
Help my viewers who are here in the Lansing area who probably know
Sure.
nothing about it understand what it is.
So the article that I did was basically a story that I had never heard about as someone who grew up in Macomb, but that helps to explain why so much of America's suburbs, Michigan suburbs, are the way they are today. And it has to do with a mixed race couple moving into Warren in 1967, that inspiring a ferocious backlash among white residents, and how ultimately it spurred George Romney, when he was in the cabinet, to try and install a national program to desegregate America's suburbs, starting with Warren as a test case. Now that effort fell apart because of the backlash in Warren, but the result of it ended up shaping the politics that we all live with today.
Help me understand what you mean by help shape the politics that we live
Sure.
with today.
Sure. So there are a couple things that I mean by that. One is that Warren, Michigan, whether or not you've been there, you've been living with its politics. It was in the 1980s, it was pinpointed as the home of the Reagan Democrats, which are blue-collar, white, socially conservative voters who traditionally had supported Democrats, but felt that the Democratic Party had come to be interested in people who weren't like them. And that meant people who were poor instead of people who were middle class, people who were black instead of people who were white, people who were living in the city rather than living in the suburbs, people who were culturally elite instead of those who were just sort of mainstream Americans. And that term Reagan Democrats actually originates from focus groups that were done in Warren, Michigan. And the ways that race influenced the way they saw American politics ended up affecting all of national politics, because there's been this hunt for the Reagan Democrats ever since. The pollster Stanley Greenberg, who identified them, who came to Macomb County and put it on the map politically, ended up being Bill Clinton's pollster. You can really draw a straight line from Macomb County to Bill Clinton, to George W. Bush, to Barack Obama, to Donald Trump, who has carried Macomb by large margins in the past two elections and is poised to do it for a third time now. And so Macomb just has this outsized role in how American politics gets thought of. National pundits, national political experts go to Macomb every 4 years. It really ends up shaping the national discussion in a way very few counties in America do.
In that context,
Yeah.
because I actually just asked about Reagan Democrats.
Sure, yeah.
So we have the Trumplicans, if you
Yeah.
will, who are also running Macomb, as you know.
Yeah.
Is there a real parallel between sort of the backlash that created the Reagan Democrats, if you will, and the Trumplicans or the Macomb Trumplicans that we see today?
Very much so. You can draw a line from the Reagan Democrats to the Trump voters in many respects. There's this sense of disaffected, largely white, middle class, working class voters who just feel like the system doesn't work for them, and that they work hard, they don't see their lives getting measurably better, they see themselves falling behind, feel that their lives are falling behind where they should be, and want someone to just shake the hell out of the system. And they find that in Donald Trump in a way that comes as just a frustration. It's a primal scream in some ways, that they're upset that the system hasn't been working for them in their eyes, and they want someone to just shake it up in a huge way, and Donald Trump represents that to them.
Was Ross Perot in some ways?
Perot was that too. There was an element of that, certainly. Perot really had people who were upset with the system, who were upset with even the two-party system in some ways, and were just looking for a breath of fresh air, and Perot represented that to them. And I think that Trump, in some ways, has a similar appeal to a lot of voters.
Now, and I'm sorry to get so into the politics,
You're good.
but you work for Politico,
yeah, that's
so
fine.
it is kind
Yeah.
of your
Yeah.
base there, right? So, look, I mean, we've had Donald Trump visit two fairly small
Yeah.
communities here in Michigan in the
Yeah.
last couple of weeks. One in Howell, which has the history of having been the home of the Grand Dragon of
Yeah.
the KKK for years.
Yeah,
And then in Potterville.
yeah.
Why visit such small communities? What does that say, A, about our politics, and B, about the small communities?
Well, it says a couple different things about our politics. One is that, all elections nowadays are basically a race to 51%, more or less. And you see those shifts that have happened in politics in the suburbs of Detroit have really meant that Trump needs to drive up the score in areas that aren't part of Metro Detroit, or that aren't, Ann Arbor, East Lansing, aren't areas where there's a large college-educated crowd. And so he knows that even if he goes to a small community, he's going to get a gigantic amount of coverage. So he knows he has supporters there. He has diehard supporters who will wait hours and hours and hours for him to speak. And he doesn't see a downside to appearing in those places. But as you've looked at places like Oakland County, which traditionally was a Republican stronghold, has shifted so far into the Democratic column that you need to make up those votes somewhere if you're a Republican running statewide, and you do it in the outstate areas. Even Kent County now, which is, went for Romney by I think 23,000 votes in 2012, and Trump carried it in 2016, but Biden carried it by about 20,000 votes in 2020. It's a huge shift, 40,000 vote shift in margin over the last however many years. And you need to make up those shifts somehow, and you do that by driving up your margins where you have a lot of support.
So let's go back to the Warren thing.
Sure.
You said something that, you grew up in the area, and
Yeah.
it was something you didn't even know about.
Yeah.
So how did you, A, learn about it,
Yeah.
and why did you become so fascinated by it?
Yeah, so I grew up in Macomb County. I spent the first 27 years of my life there. My dad grew up in Warren in the 60s. I came across this story because I was interested in Macomb County and its politics, and I saw that in the 1970 census, Warren had about 180,000 residents, and only 132 of them were black. And I wondered if I could actually identify who these people were and find out what happened to them. And in the process of that, I came across this story of Ruby and Corrado Bailey, a mixed-race couple that moved in 1967 and had these riots happen in response. And it was fascinating to me as something I had never heard about. Just the idea that this could have happened so close to where I grew up, and I had never even heard of it, was stunning to me. And my dad had never heard of it. And everyone I spoke to about it in Macomb County, no one had ever heard of it. And that alone was interesting to me. How did we forget about this? But then as you dug a bit more into it, you'd see that what happened to the Baileys ended up impacting American life altogether, whether it's in politics and the Reagan Democrats' rise, whether it's in maintaining the segregation of America's suburbs with the backlash to George Romney's policy, whether it's just in the way that Warren itself kind of grew and adapted, and large chunks of the city were just sort of left desolate because they refused federal funds to improve them. So it became something that there's a great sense of reward when you're digging and digging and digging for a story, and finally you come across a little nugget of gold amid all the dirt. And that's really what the process of reporting was in this case, where I dug and dug and dug, and occasionally you'd find these little gold nuggets, and those little gold nuggets told an incredible story.
As a writer,
Yeah.
35,000 words for,
Yeah.
I was like, wow,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that's a lot.
yeah.
But it ended up being the 17,000.
Yes, it did, yeah.
How long ago was that published?
It was in December.
And what's been sort of the response to that?
I think for some people it was that it came out in December shortly ahead of Christmas. They missed it. But those people who did read it, I've gotten just tremendous feedback from. People who found it very moving, people who feel like where they live, where they've grown up, has sort of been explained to them in a way that they didn't know about beforehand, but that explains so much about their community. The feedback has been really rewarding to hear, and that's one of the things you want in journalism, is to write stories that have impact and that matter to people. And when you are able to find those stories, it's just a tremendous feeling.
So I do a lot of investigative stuff
Yeah.
myself. So, and I have a lot of people always ask me, how do you do it?
Yeah.
How do you deal with sort of other people's trauma? And this
Yeah.
clearly has
Yeah.
trauma attached to it. And I always tell them it's because I know at the end of the day this is going to help.
Yes, yeah,
What is your hope
yeah.
going forward, that having told this story, having written the first draft, if you will,
Yeah.
of that history,
Yeah.
will do moving forward?
I think it'll give people a new perspective on Macomb County and also national politics on some level. But I think my hope on some level, my hope is that it makes people feel empowered, because these are ultimately ordinary people we're talking about at the end of the day. The Baileys were an ordinary family that encountered extraordinary backlash and extraordinary violence for just an everyday thing, trying to live in a neighborhood that they wanted to live in. The Mumas, the white couple who acted as straw buyers, who purchased this home when the Baileys were refused because the homeowners didn't want to sell to a mixed-race couple. The Mumas did an extraordinary act of bravery, and it's the type of thing that all of us have the potential to do, just with these everyday little things that we encounter. And it may seem small at the time, it might even seem big at the time, but any act you take really has the potential to matter to people in ways that you can't even foresee at the moment.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think is really important as it
No.
applies to your story, as it applies to the politics?
I don't think so. I'm happy to answer whatever, but no, I'm happy with that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.